Lord Puttnam was the 2010 Asia-Pacific Screen Awards International Jury President.
We owe a debt of gratitude to the nomination committee for making it possible for us to look at 31 remarkable movies. I'd like to take a moment just to really, in a way, congratulate and recognise the extraordinary work that Des Powers put into creating these awards. You've got the most amazing team. And also the Government of Queensland for backing them to the hilt. They've, I think, got themselves a jewel. I hope they realise it. I think they do. And it's something to be protected, nurtured and developed over the years. I'm very proud to be able to look back, say, 10 years from now and say, I was there very early on and look at it now.
He also gave a keynote speech on the changes brought about by the transition to a fully digital era.
In what is an increasingly digital era, cinema audiences across the world would appear to have maintained an all but insatiable appetite for what the industry does best. Stories that are well told and which serve to nourish their imaginations. Despite the growing proliferation in ways of delivering movies to audiences, filmmakers today, every bit as much as in the past, aspire to having their work presented in the cinema, on the big screen, where their work continues to be seen to its very best effect. And now, we have this recent and successful iteration of 3D, a technology that's been around before, but which has been completely rebooted for the digital era. For sure, it's got its critics, but then a quick glance at the early reactions to Technicolor offers up many of the same reservations and complaints. In fact, I don't think there's ever been a new technology that's arrived that hasn't been deluged with complaints that it's dumbing down and changing the world in a negative way. But where 3D is already proving its worth is in revitalizing the exhibition sector by bringing in new investment, new players, new audiences, and far more flexible programming for an ever more fragmented customer base. Now, it happens to be my belief that it won't be movies, but multiplayer gaming that will cause the real revolution. But that's an art form, the potential of which we've barely begun to scratch the surface. Getting that right will represent an enormous creative challenge for a whole new generation of yet unknown filmmakers. Early last month, Google announced that the amount of video uploaded to YouTube is now running at 35 hours per minute. As they themselves put it, in movie terms, assuming the average Hollywood films are around 120 minutes, 35 hours a minute is the equivalent of over 176,000 full-length Hollywood releases every week. Or put another way, if 3 of the major US networks have been broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year for the last 60 years, they still wouldn't have broadcast as much content as is uploaded onto YouTube every single 30 days. But despite this cornucopia of material, much of it unwatched and a great deal of it utterly unwatchable, it is cinema as a collective experience that retains its significant and enduring value in this digital environment. Now, I happen to believe that in essence that remains equally true today. Cinema is, or certainly ought to be, the one true international language, reaching out and touching the hearts and the minds of its audiences throughout the world. And nowhere is this more true than across the incredibly diverse mix of cultures that are found within the Asia-Pacific region. Cinema has the ability to express and celebrate every one of our most important experiences. Film, uniquely in my judgment, has the power to mark out the truly personal moments in every one of our lives. Birth, death, love, family. In fact, all of our great joys and losses, each of these seemingly unique emotions, can be captured, immortalized, and reflected back to us by the power of the medium. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, the American social philosopher Eric Hoffer captured this notion, I think, very beautifully when he said this. He said, "It's not so much the examples of others that we imitate as the reflection of ourselves in their eyes and the echo of ourselves in their words."
Will the digital era lessen or strengthen the dominance of Hollywood, do you think?
Because in making the big 3D movies, that kind of capital tends only to be available, if not from Hollywood, at least when distributed by Hollywood. So it could strengthen it in that sense. On the other hand, with the emergence of a country like India, where there is both capital and skills and a big audience,
I can well imagine a situation where another nation, India, China, who knows, Australia, got a grip of 3D or began to understand 3D in a way that maybe the Americans didn't. You know, what Hollywood is a global marketing operation, but it doesn't mind what it markets. And I think this is something I want to get across. If it ended up marketing a stream of 6 films that have been made by a Filipino, which were absolutely sensational, and audiences rushed around the world to watch, they'd do it. They'd be very happy because they'd probably get them quite cheaply. So it's a terrible mistake to think that Hollywood is trying to sell American stories to the rest of the world. It isn't. What Hollywood's trying to do is market movies to the rest of the world, wherever they're made from, wherever they arise from, and whoever makes them.
Does film play a role in educating the next generation as well?
Massive role. The example I use, and I'll be using it at Griffith University later today, the example that I try to use is the role that cinema played in changing attitudes to racism in the United States in the late 1950s and the 60s. What happens, very interesting, the American films of the early 50s were part of the problem, and they tried to pretend that racism didn't exist. You then had a generation of writers in the late 50s and early 60s who wrote into the movies, a lot of the movies, dozens and dozens of issues and examples of how racism affected America and how, in fact, it was stunting America's growth. And what they did was, I believe it was cinema more than anything else, that created a kind of culture of understanding or a sensitization to the issue that made Kennedy and subsequently Johnson able to bring about the legislative changes they were able to pull off in the early and mid-60s.
What are you now in pursuit of?
Well, I'll be 70 in February, and I could assume that this is one of the last laps I'm going to be going round. I think I'm in pursuit of doing my best to ensure that the world that my father thought he'd won in 1945 and 50, with the social changes in Britain between 45 and 50, the fact of winning the war in 45, he was very clear about the world he thought he was fighting for and thought that politically had been won. And I think the last decade of my life is absolutely about trying to do my best to ensure that at least some of those dreams, some of that attitude to what social justice might look like, just that, take place. I don't mind, I've reached a point now, I don't mind losing. What I mind like mad is I didn't try hard enough.
Well, Lord David Puttnam, I could sit here and keep talking to you for another hour. It's been an absolute privilege, but for now, thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Simon. Thank you.